1. I worked at a small AV company. We dealt with thousands of NEC displays every year, and management had absolutely no idea how to deal with the waste from each job, mainly polystyrene. We used to throw it in the skip. Job gets done, taken away. The company hired a new general manager. Martin his name was, who worked with me for 2 months. At this job I ran many roles, as it was a small company. I was busy all day, every day with warehouse management, PC configuration and IT support, and also working in accounts with purchasing and ordering stock, etc. My pay didn't even cover warehouse management, let alone any of my other jobs. Martin decided to email me with a request on how I could manage the job that I'd been working at for 5+ years and knew like the back of my hand. Martin's top priority on the email was cutting the polystyrene into small squares to save space in the bins. Yep. I emailed Martin back to explain that if I'm standing there cutting polystyrene cubes into small squares, then most of my work time would be spent doing that, and leaving no time for anything else. He replied by saying that it should still be top priority on my things to do. So yeah, I took that literally. Nothing got done. No stock orders, no kit preparation, no deliveries, no PC builds. I couldn't fetch anything down from the racks on the forklift. I was the only one trained to do so. Absolutely nothing was done apart from cutting polystyrene into small cubes. Martin even brought in his own saw from home to help me save time in cutting polystyrene up. 2 days went by. I had cut over 100+ blocks of styrene into small squares to save room in the bin. Everything in the company was falling to shit, and Martin came down in a panic. Nothing had been done, like I said, as I didn't have the time if I cut the polystyrene into small squares. So I ended up having an argument with Martin in the warehouse, asking about why the absolute fuck am I cutting polystyrene into small squares. Martin said it was to save money on buying skips. Then I pointed out, they have paid me more than an extra collection over 2 days of cutting the polystyrene up. He walked off. A day later I received an email from my other manager, who was higher up than Martin, which basically said I have a disciplinary meeting at lunchtime that day. My reply was obviously no. I needed time to prepare what I was going to say and made them push it back a week. I collected statements on my work from all my colleagues that were willing. Some even confronted Martin and called him an idiot, which quite rightly he was. I collected my year's work, every job, every PC configuration, every order, every delivery, every prep kit, etc. Everything was piled into 6 folders to throw at them. So I had my disciplinary meeting and threw everything at them, and they were absolutely speechless with everything I was doing, and that I had been told to prioritize cutting polystyrene into small cubes to save on bin space. When asked if I had any questions, I asked one that shut them up instantly. What risk assessment was carried out before asking an employee to cut up bonded polystyrene, and what PPE was provided? I have a recording of the meeting, and every single manager sat there in silence. My question went unanswered, and one said, "We'll answer that in our report," which I never received. Anyway, Martin was made redundant soon after. He was asked to drop his work equipment to me at the office. He sent it with a courier instead. 2. This story took place on a small island in Greece on a hot summer day in 2014. My family owns a small convenience store, which is right across from a hotel and is our prime source of business. And I would work there every summer after my university finals. At that point in time, I was a 23-year-old university student, meaning I loved going out and staying late with friends. I loved sleeping till noon, and I absolutely hated the day shift. Opening the store, cleaning, talking with vendors, etc. On that particular day, I somehow woke up at 7 a.m. with energy, and was in a good mood without even taking a sip of coffee. Anyway, I headed to the store, opened it, and got done with all chores and tasks before 8:30 a.m. I had yet to have a customer, as the hotel's guests tend to leave the hotel around 9 a.m. after having breakfast. The locals and other tourists are more active around noon, as they head to the beaches in our area. When it comes to customer service, I am chirpy, smile brightly, give 200% of myself, and go the extra mile to help, even if I'm sleep-deprived. However, I have a pet peeve. When I greet someone, I want to get greeted back even if it's lackluster or half-assed. So here enters the first customer of the day. Old Money. Old Money was an approximately 65-year-old caricature of the 80s Greek lover stereotype. 4 out of 5 top buttons of the shirt unbuttoned, hairy chest enough to trap the summer's bloodthirsty mosquitoes, gold chain with a gold cross around the neck, and more tan than a fisherman fighting with the waves to catch fish. With a lit cigar in his mouth, aviator sunglasses, and an attitude of, "Do you know who I am?" Old Money came inside the store with his lit cigar, and I greeted him, said good morning with my brightest smile, and offered him an ashtray to place his lit cigar, which I would then place outside, as it is not allowed to have lit cigarettes and cigars, surprise, surprise, in stores. He didn't greet me back, frowned, and was bothered that I asked to take away his precious cigar. At that point, I was starting to get annoyed, and he hadn't even told me what he wanted. Still, I didn't let that show on my face. "I want water." First of all, hello and good morning. Again, he didn't greet back. I let it slide and told myself, you should not bother. We have cold bottles of water outside and even colder ones in the freezer if you're interested, so that they will last you longer. "From freezer, small ones. Go get them." Do I even have to mention the self-service part of a convenience store? Anyhow, I still kept my smile, told myself not to argue with him, and that the sooner he left, the better for my mental health, and went to fetch the bottles of water. "Do you need anything else?" "No." "Okay, that will be €3. Old Money took a wad of cash of all colors out of his pocket with a money clip, and gave me a €50 bill. Sorry for asking, but do you maybe have a smaller bill? We have a fund for breaking big bills, but we try to avoid it, and ask if the customer has smaller bills, to get through with the rest of our day. Greece entered the point of sale and card game late, so we didn't have a card machine back then. "You're the cashier. You deal with it." At the moment, something popped inside me. Do you guys know what wealthy wannabes hate most in the world? The clinging sound of coins in their pockets. For non-Europeans, the euro coins are the following: 1 cent, 2 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents, 20 cents, 50 cents, €1, and €2. I could easily give him €45 in bills and a £2 coin, right? Where's the fun in that, however? As such, I gave him €40 in bills and 7 in coins. How many coins, do you ask? 100 1 cents, 100 2 cents, 45 cents, 10 cents, 5 20 cents, of course. I painstakingly counted them one by one before him. He was dumbfounded when I handed him all the coins. "What is this?" "It's your change, sir. As you kindly reminded me, I am the cashier, and I dealt with it." I keep smiling as I said that with an innocent, angelic face. He was rendered speechless and stomped out of the shop with a red face, forgetting to get his precious cigar with him. Have a nice day. One would expect he would never enter our store again, right? Yes, we were wrong as well. He came again the next day. Now, I have to mention that I have a younger brother who is 2 years younger than me, so that makes him 21 at that timeline, who worked at the store too, and he is the personification of resting bitch face. He's a great person, but you'll either love him or hate him to the bone. I had told my brother about Old Money and the incident, and he craved that he was in my shoes. So, chance encounter. It was afternoon when Old Money entered the store. My brother was at the register tending to 3 customers, while I was outside restocking the fridges. I noticed Old Money head inside and whispered to my brother, "It's him." My brother glanced at him, arched his eyebrow, and told me he got it. As such, I started tending to one of the 3 earlier customers, and Old Money spoke to me. "I want 6 bottles of water like yesterday." Before I had the chance to speak, my brother interjected. "Here's a plastic bag. You can go outside and pick the bottles of water you like." "But yesterday he fetched me the bottles." "As you can see, we're tending to customers who came before you, and we can offer to help when it's not a busy time. Old Money took the bag reluctantly, picked his bottles, and came inside to pay. This time he gave the exact amount and left. My brother and I smirked and continued with our day. 3. So I lived in a flat with 5 other people a few years ago. The people were Jess, Bob, David, Callum, and Dara. Female. We started renting this flat when we were around 19 and rented for about 2 or 3 years. Dara and I were probably the closest pair out of everyone. After nights out, we would have sleepovers in each other's rooms and stay up late watching TV. The problems all started when I got a boyfriend. Dara, around the same time, began a relationship with Callum, our shared flatmate. Because of this, we both began to spend a little less time together. At this time, my family was also going through a lot, with my mom getting diagnosed with dementia and her sister being admitted to rehab after I found her in a pool of her own vomit. During this time, I was barely in the flat. I was mostly taking care of my aunt's kids, as well as making sure my mom had the proper care she needed. At the flat, tensions had started to rise. But despite being my best friend, Dara never asked where I was nor if I was okay. I knew she was annoyed at me for something, and I could tell Callum was too, but I was so exhausted from family commitments I never brought it up with them. Fast forward maybe a year, and I still get on well with Jess, David, and Bob, but Dara and Callum will barely acknowledge me in the kitchen, and conversations are one-sided. Me always asking them how they are, what they're up to, etc. Not only that, but they've begun to spread rumors about me and my boyfriend to our friends, saying we're having relationship problems, saying I tried to dump him, but he wouldn't let me, etc. None of this was true. Around the same time, I got mono and couldn't leave my bed for a few days. They had messaged me a few times, but being bedridden, I didn't answer right away. Next time I enter the kitchen, I can tell Callum is angry, so I ask what I had done wrong. He starts berating me, telling me that I'm ugly, a slut, fat, and nobody in the flat even cares about me. He runs off before I can ask why he's so angry. Then things start happening to my belongings. My shampoo smelled really funny, like it had gone off. My food started going missing. My body wash got really runny. And worst of all, one day there was a stain on my toothbrush. I told my friends what I suspected, but I never told my friends about my revenge. I pissed in their shared face wash, I put Veet in their shampoo, I replaced all her sugar with salt. I also replaced their protein powder with bulking solution of the same flavor. By this time, they had also decided to move out. One of Dara's gripes with me was that we both had cars and, where we live, you are only entitled to 1 parking space per flat. I knew her flatmate was considering reinsuring their old car, so I convinced them that would be a great idea. Maybe I went too far, but they didn't have to be so cruel when I was at such a low point in my life. 4. I've got one gem of a story that my grandfather told me about his hometown after he came home from World War II. It has to do with a tree farmer, a corrupt mayor, and over 20 homes getting bulldozed. At the end of World War II, thousands of troops were heading home, starting new families, and wanted to move out of the city. There was a major housing boom all around the country. People couldn't move out of the cities fast enough, and developers could not build homes fast enough. There was a ton of money to be made in the construction business, which led to some underhanded building practices. One such practice was starting construction before the land acquisition was finalized. Enter my grandfather. After serving as a pilot during the war, he came home to a very different town. When my grandfather went off to fight in 1942, the town that he described leaving was tired and worn down. But to his amazement, the town he saw stepping off the train in 1948 was anything but. Newly paved roads, a traffic light, and new homes. New homes that just went on and on. He actually got lost on his way back to the family farm due to the new main town road being rerouted while he was away. But what took him by surprise the most was the new development being built on his childhood friend John's tree farm. This was surprising to him, mainly because he knew how much the farm meant to John and his family. The farm went back at least 2 generations, but my grandfather just guessed that the developer made John's family an offer too good to refuse. However, that thought was shot down later that evening during his welcome home dinner back home. It was my great-grandmother who tipped him off that something was off. He couldn't recall exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of, "Oh, I just wish John was still alive to be here." My grandfather nearly choked, not because of the news, but because John was not dead. He was still in Hawaii. My grandfather had gotten a postcard from him not but 4 days before. Turns out, while John was off in the Navy fighting in the Pacific Theater, John's dad had suffered a stroke and passed away. And his mother passed away less than a week later from a broken heart. More than likely, John was never informed of their passing, and now 20-plus homes were being built on their land. My grandfather about ran out of the house, jumped in his father's Model T, and raced into town to send one bombshell of a telegraph to John in Hawaii. "John, your folks passed. Farm now being built on. Come quick, G." My grandfather never got a response back. He figures that John must have fainted from the shock, then jumped up and ran to the Navy base to get on the first boat home. Because he was back home in less than 4 days, and he was mad. According to my grandfather, when he burst through the doors of the mayor's office, everyone in the room looked like they were about to drop dead. The poor desk clerk was fumbling over his words, trying to talk to John. Then the mayor came out of his office to see what all the commotion was about. As soon as he saw John, he went white as a sheet and ran back into his office and locked the door. Getting nowhere at the mayor's office, John went to the next town over and hired a lawyer. What followed was a 7-year court case that ended up in the mayor being sentenced to 8 years in jail and a developer going bankrupt. Turns out that after John's parents passed away, John wasn't able to be contacted for some reason, and was just assumed dead. So when an out-of-state developer wanted to build homes in the area, the mayor just permitted them to start building on John's farm for a hefty kickback, of course. Also, because of John's lawsuit, the developer couldn't finish the pre-sold homes, which ended up in more lawsuits. In the end, the mayor and developer and the town ended up having to pay John close to $45,000 in total, which is over $752,000 today. And then he had the farm returned to its prior condition. To say John was happy would be a vast understatement. Today, John's tree farm is a nature reserve, and the story of the corrupt mayor is all but forgotten except for by a few locals. John passed away in 1999. My grandfather has been back to his hometown a few times to visit his grave and check on the old tree farm. Thanks for listening. Five. I met my ex in 2012, right after he turned 20, and I had just turned 30. I'd only dated and been with women exclusively until I came out as bisexual at 28. Let's just say the year I was 29 was a busy year, making up for what I missed out on. It was mostly casual hookups, yes, safe, and I did try dating 2 different guys for 2 weeks, but it just never worked out or got serious. I kind of figured that I'd probably end up marrying a woman or not getting married at all, because I just didn't see myself catching romantic and sexual feelings for a guy. Then I met Ryan. For the first date, it was like the only other time in my life I had fallen in love. Butterflies, constantly thinking about him, wanting to spend every moment with him. He fell for me hard too, and we became an item, though he did say while he considered my bisexuality a turn-on, because he had a thing for straight guys, it also gave him pause because of my desires for the opposite sex, and his concern it may lead me astray. I thought about it and understood it was a legitimate worry, but assured him I couldn't even think about anyone else because I was really into him. Note, I knew he was the one by the end of the first month, and I was in love. But I wasn't going to say these things too soon and risk scaring him off. On our first date, he admitted to me that he was legally blind due to a genetic disorder and that it was progressive and eventually he would have only a sliver of his peripheral vision. He immediately said he understood if I didn't want to see him again because no other guy had wanted to date him and be his driver all of the time. I grew up with a brother in a wheelchair who never learned how to walk or talk due to misdiagnosed meningitis at 6 months old back in the 70s. I told him that, and he said that what my brother had was a severe disability. So in my perspective, his blindness had no effect on my feelings, and that always being the driver was a small sacrifice just to be with him. The next 3 years were bliss. We brought out the best in each other. My family, who was surprised but very supportive when I came out, adored Ryan and treated him like family and said that I acted happier since we'd been together. When I met him, he was working part-time in retail and had done very poorly in high school because he lost a lot of his confidence as his vision deteriorated. I told him that one thing I did insist on was that he do something with his life because he had too much to offer and that I would help. He said that he wanted to be a teacher, but didn't think someone with limited vision could teach. Nonsense. So I put him through community college for 2 years and 2.5 years of a local university. And finally, the 1-year teacher certification program as required by California. I drove countless miles and paid hundreds in public transportation costs for him, never blinking an eye or complaining. We'd been together 7.5 years and were engaged to be married in October by the time he was in his last semester of his teaching certification, which involved him student teaching at his former high school with his favorite teacher from his days in school. Then the pandemic hit, and schools closed. Fortunately, he'd had enough hours in classroom that he would still qualify to be certified after the governor issued a waiver via executive order. On the 3rd day of the stay-at-home order in March, my life crumbled when I innocently found out he had cheated on me with an ex, all because he handed his phone to me to show me something on Instagram. I accidentally fat-thumbed the back arrow button when he gave it to me, taking me back to a list of all his messages. I looked and recognized the name of his ex as the second message dated a week ago. I clicked on it and my heart sank. Directions to my house, pictures, dirty talk, and reassuring him not to worry about me because he had my location on my Find My Friends, just in case I came home from work. I immediately started screaming and demanding to know everything, and he admitted to having his ex over twice for sex and that they didn't use protection. His ex was engaged to his girlfriend during this, adding another victim. Then he admitted to sleeping with his straight but curious recently single cousin, by marriage, twice. Again, no protection. Finally, he admitted to sleeping with a supposedly straight guy he and many of my cousins went to school with, who I told Ryan I didn't really like or want them talking because I didn't trust him. Since they were never close friends, I didn't feel like this was a big sacrifice, or that I was being too controlling. And I assumed that he knew why, and all my cousins felt that way, but didn't bother repeating it. The reason was, after high school, at age 20, this guy was convicted of sexual assault and penetration with a foreign object against a 16-year-old girl, and had gone to jail and required to register as a sex offender for life. Apparently, my ex was the only person in his graduating class that hadn't heard that news. All of this happened in my home while I was working. We spent the whole weekend crying, with me asking over and over why him repeatedly crying, and saying he just didn't know and he felt terrible. Monday comes around and anger started being as common as sadness, and I made a comment that I said I was going to pull all the phone records going back the 3 years that AT&T kept them for a fee. Only when he heard that did he admit to one more guy. Some random named Frankie off the gay hookup app Grindr, who was the first guy he cheated with and continued to casually hook up with for nearly 2 years, with the last time being in February, the month before. He told me how it started. Get this. It was the day after his graduation with his BA in May of 2018, and he was drunk from celebrating and wanted to have sex. I too had been celebrating with him and said I was too drunk to perform and said I'd make it up the next day, then passed out asleep on the couch. Apparently he was angry horny because he downloaded Grindr, chatted with this Frankie fellow, and arranged to have sex in his car in a church parking lot across the street from our condo, which happens to be across the street from a school. All the while I slept on the couch. All the times they hooked up after that was again in my condo while I was working or visiting a friend for the night up the coast. He used to love going, but started saying he couldn't occasionally because of homework and studying. I absolutely lost it. Told him to get in the car, and I drove him to his family's house, so he could tell them what he did so they understood why he was moving back into their house. While he was in the house, I was in the driveway on the phone with AT&T, ordering the 3 years' worth of detailed call and text logs, then made an appointment to be screened for STIs. I also changed his number. He'd had it for years, but I took it over and added it to my plan 2 or 3 before because his parents were tired of paying it. Then suspended his service, deleted his social media, and changed all his passwords so only I could have access to his cloud. I also called the bank and issued a stop payment on his final tuition check that I had sent to the certification program the week before and hadn't hit the bank yet. Before deleting his social media, except Facebook, I took screenshots of the entire Instagram conversation with his ex and mailed the conversation to his fiancée, who deserved to know so she could see a doctor too. His family was very religious and had kicked him out of high school for 3 days when he tried to admit he was bi. And it only took him back when he took it back. Needless to say, she ended it, he got kicked out. 1 down. He came back out to the car and we went home. I took his house key and told him to say goodbye to our 3 pets and get packing. The entire time he packed, I studied those phone records to find out dates, times, and if there was anyone else he was leaving out. He answered every question I asked. And it was then that I discovered that the sex offender and he only had oral sex in my home, and that the actual sex was in the same parking lot he screwed the Frankie guy in. The wheels started turning, and the next day I went over there and sure enough spotted a camera. I spoke to a secretary at the church and informed them about a registered sex offender having sex in their lot, and that not only was it a violation of his parole for indecent exposure, but that he was not allowed to be that close to a school, and I provided the date. I was in luck. They had a digital 2-year loop system that started deleting day by day after it had been retained for 2 years plus 1 day. It was April 2020, and the first he cheated with Frankie was May 2018, and the sex offender was in April 2019. I told them I was filing a police report and that probation would require a copy of it eventually. They said they would save a file and allowed me a thumb drive of both days to submit with my police report. Within a month, the sex offender was locked up again. 2 down. I also filed a police report against a Frankie guy. The police said it was a relatively minor infraction, but since it was across from a school playground and skate park, they would follow up, but there would be no jail time. I researched the hell out of Frankie and called him to confront him. He was smug and admitted to knowing about me the whole time. What he didn't know is that I had found out he had a job that required a security clearance, and he had several judgments against him, and collection agencies had been looking for him. I didn't know why they couldn't find him and just garnish his wages, but it ends up he was Hispanic and had 2 last names and was a junior, plus he frequently went by his middle name Francisco, Frankie for short. So he got lost in the paperwork confusion. I sent a letter to the collections agencies providing his employer and current location and contact info, and then sent a copy of the police report about misdemeanor incident exposure for which he had pled guilty, and it was a fine with community service, not considered a sex crime. His wages did get garnished, but only for 2 paychecks because the misdemeanor was enough for him to lose his security clearance and get fired. 3 down. Then I contacted Ryan's family on his mother's side, pretending to be him from his Facebook account, making sure they knew he had fucked his cousin. It spread through the family like wildfire, and soon his cousin was contacting me because he couldn't get a hold of Ryan to ask why he would expose what they did. I just laughed and said he shouldn't screw your cousins, especially when they're engaged, and that he'd messed around in my house, so now it was my turn for payback. 4 down. Lastly, I had already stopped payment, but since he was so close to finishing, I was sure his family would bail him out and pay the university. Like I said, indecent exposure is usually a slap on the wrist type of misdemeanor. However, I remembered some of the paperwork he signed to be a mandated reporter, that you could lose teaching certification for documented acts of moral turpitude. I sent a copy of both police reports from the parking lot with shots from the security footage, clearly showing Ryan's face to the school district he'd been teaching in, and a copy of the Commission on Teacher Credentials. 5th and final down. Admittedly, I did all this out of anger, but he shattered my sense of self-worth and made me incredibly bitter and untrusting after years of being generous and supporting him. Everywhere I looked in town, I thought of Ryan and the cheating. I felt a terrible energy in my condo, knowing it all happened there. I stayed 9 months and watched all 5 of their lives self-destruct. Then sold my condo, making a nice profit, and relocated to the Pacific Northwest to start over. One thing that is sad, I found out just recently, that his ex, whose fiancée broke up with him, ended up committing suicide several months after I moved. It is too bad that his family was so close-minded to turn on their own son. But in the end, it's not my fault that he cheated on his fiancée by coming into my home at my fiancée's invitation to cheat. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge's Ice Cream, episode 251. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Please do boop the like button before you go. I would appreciate it. Alrighty, as there's no other business, let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... They say the first bite is with the eye, so presentation and cooking always counts. But what is something that actually looks kind of nasty you really enjoy? I'm going to go with haggis. It is basically a pile of mush with bits and stuff in it. I like it with butter beans, but it is very yummy and delicious, and I've enjoyed it for years. Let me know what some of your favorite nasty-looking foodstuffs are in a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.